I'm Dan Bricklin. I'm best known as the co-creator of VisiCalc, the first of what we now call electronic spreadsheets, where you have A, B, C, D, one, two, three, four. And I built that. I came up with the idea and worked with my friend Bob Frankston, who did most of the coding. I came up with the idea in 1978, and in 1979, we released it to the public. And I'm talking to you on the Floppy Days Vintage Computing Podcast.
All right, I'm here today with Dan Bricklin, one of the developers or a co-developer of the VisiCalc software that I'm sure everyone has heard of. Hey Dan, how are you, sir?
Doing okay. It's
Good. So maybe we can just start out by having you tell us where you live today and what you're up to these days.
okay. Well, I live where I've been living for the last 40, like 40 years or so. And actually more than that but I moved to this house. I've been in this house since like 86 or something like that. And I've been living in Newton, Massachusetts, which is right outside of Boston. Newton, Massachusetts is known for a variety of things. One is that the Fig Newton cookie that is sold was named after the city of Newton. There were other ones named after other cities around here, but the only one that has survived and is still popular is the Fig Newton, the official uh, cookie of the city. And across the street from me, apparently, the Pledge of Allegiance was written. If you believe that
Oh,
Francis Bellamy wrote it, he wrote it in the window that I'm looking at out of my window. We found that out
oh,
years ago.
nice, nice.
So,
I did not know that about Fig Newton. I guess I always thought it was named after the
yes, you
famous
would.
scientist.
Now, who knows what our town is named after? I haven't looked that up. But it was there, there was a baking company down, I guess in Cambridge or something that became that Nabisco bought at some point. And I don't know what the Brookline was, but uh,
I know it was a long time ago, but could you maybe fill us in as to what your first experience was with computers?
the first one that I remember um, was I visited one of my grandfathers was the editor of a small paper in Philadelphia where I lived. And I went to his office and they were using an IBM card sorter and probably one of the old printers and stuff to do their mailing list. This was probably uh, let's see, I was probably in like third grade or second or third grade when that happened. I mean, so that's way back in the probably in the 50s. And he so that I saw that and I was really moved by it. And actually, a few years later, for a science fair project, I built a manual card sorter that you turned it, and your card would go through, and a little thing would decide whether to let it go into this bin or that bin. Because
Hmm,
so I
nice.
had seen one then, but that was electromechanical type, the early IBM before they were doing the heavy electronic ones. This is when you used uh, plug boards, wire plug boards to be able to control them. And then, but I was always interested in it, and I wanted to build one, to build my own, but I wasn't. That was, you had to learn how to make flip-flops, and when I tried to do that out of transistors and all that, integrated circuits were just becoming available back in then, I guess in the 60s. So I never really got to build one. Um, but I did when I was in grade school. My cousin went to a local high school that had access to a time sharing system. It was one of the handful of schools in the Philadelphia area that had access to computers on a terminal connected to a big computer downtown, a 70 something or other IBM computer. And that's where I first learned to program. is that he brought home the manual. I would learn that. I didn't go to that school, but after school, I would go over to that school, meet him and a friend of his, and the three of us would work on that computer, which was like an IBM Selectric, connected to a telephone line, which went to a computer downtown, and programmed in some version of Fortran or something like that. The first thing I typed in, spelled dimension wrong. So that was the first computers. Then the next time to do some computing stuff, I borrowed time on the school system of Philadelphia's computers. They had a 1401, an IBM 1401 downtown, and I would go downtown and they let me take a few minutes of time to run these programs that I typed up on punch cards down there. So that was the first, you can have it to yourself for a while computer I had was an IBM 1130. That was the summer that I turned 16. So that would have been 57, the summer of 67. And there was a course I took at the University of Pennsylvania down the hall from where ENIAC, the first real digital computer or whatever, was actually built. Down the hall from where that would be at the Moore School of the University of Pennsylvania, I took a summer course, a National Science Foundation summer course on programming. And that was it. And from then on, I was into it. Then I had all sorts of computers then from then on.
Okay. So it looks like, I took a look at some of the history that you have on your website, and it looks like one of your earliest jobs in the computer industry was with Digital Equipment Corporation, where
That
you
was,
worked
yeah,
on
my first job actually was at MIT, where I worked,
MIT.
right, where I worked on the Multics project. Out of Multics came Unix and Linux and all that, the operating system. Then I went worked for there. I worked for Honeywell a little bit on the APL programming language, helping build that. And then my first job out of school was at Digital Equipment Corporation. May it rest in peace. The mini computer.
And it was interesting because it looks like you worked on a word processor for
Yep.
the PDP-8 while you were there, which
Yep. Do you remember David All of
oh,
Creative
oh,
Computing?
absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Well, David worked for DEC at
creative
one point.
computing.
Creative Computing. He did Creative Computing magazine. He had worked for DEC, for Digital Equipment Corporation, in the educational division, and he came up with this idea of taking a PDP-8 mini computer, which is, well, about yay big,
Hmm.
and this, and the idea of putting a rack in a desk where a file cabinet would be, and put a PDP-8 in there, and that became a thing that DEC sold, and they would put a terminal on top of it, a video terminal on top of it, VTO5 or something, and eventually they had VT100s. The commercial group said, "Oh, we can make this into a commercial thing." And maybe we should put word processing on it. And I ended up in that group because I had been in working on computerized typesetting before that. And I knew all about text, and I had built a text editor for a device that was connected to the PDP-10. Got to work in that near the PDP-10 group, which included one or more people who had worked on the original Star Wars, Space War video game. So
Okay.
that was, which is interesting. So the PC industry sort of, overlapped, and I was product leader of a thing called this was the ad for it. They show you replace this with this. And you see the desk, they're two floppy drives. Those are 8-inch floppies.
Yep. Yeah.
And this is a PDP-8, and that was the terminal on it. And we got that from Xerox. And this is the functional specification of it. There's my name. Jack Gilmore signed it. He was the
Very
person
cool.
Jack actually wrote what is arguably the first video game ever back in 1951.
That's great. That's
Yeah,
cool.
so
You
that's
still
how I
got
had
those
that
artifacts.
experience working with very basic computers in machine language, well, in assembly language.
Okay. So next we get in, I guess, into the topic of VisiCalc, which
Mhm.
is obviously what you're most well known for, even though you've done so
Yeah,
many of the things. Tell us about the idea for that, how that came about, and starting software arts with Dan Bricklin.
with Bob Frankston.
I'm sorry, Bob
But there
Bob
are only two of
Frankston.
us, Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankston,
Yeah, with
and
yourself.
right, and Bricklin comes before Frankston alphabetically. So I, after working at DEC, I worked at a small company and made electronic cash registers. But what I really wanted to do was to go back to school to learn business. And so I applied and got into Harvard Business School and then went there. And at the Harvard Business School, I came up with the idea for word processing with numbers. I mean, there's a whole story about it, which you can hear if you want, but basically came up with the idea of having this. Eventually, when I prototyped it, came up with the idea of a grid and 1, 2, 3 ABC, and having a formula bar and all those things that we now associate with the electronic spreadsheet. I built the prototype of that um, and borrowed an Apple II, which was new in those days back in the fall of 1978, and prototyped it. And then made a deal with my friend Bob Frankston that he would actually write code for this thing. And we made a deal with another person who had gone to Harvard Business School was a year ahead of me, had graduated, who was publishing software for personal computers. He had a company called um, Personal Software, and they made software for the Apple II, the TRS-80, and the Commodore PET. And we made a deal that they would publish this thing. We would make this electronic spreadsheet, which eventually became named VisiCalc. Bob wrote that in the winter of 1978, 79, mainly in 1979. In the spring of 1979, wrote it. And we showed it to the public in June of 1979. And it was shipped in October of 1979 on floppy disk, copy protected, for an Apple II, and was only available on the Apple II initially, though we always planned to put it on other machines. But it took a year before we finished enough of the being able to move it to the other machines, and the other machines had floppy drives available in enough quantity that it was worth selling to them. And we came out on the Commodore PET, the TRS-80, eventually the TRS-80 Model 1, 2, and 3. HP on um, uh, their personal computer thingy that they sold, whatever. We licensed them the software, and they sort of made the version sort of for that, and then started putting it on others. The Atari 800, I remember that well. When we first got that, it was sort of like a prototype or whatever, and we loved that. We loved playing what was it, Star Raiders or whatever that was on that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep. We on the Apple II we used to play. Um, we'd play Space Invaders. We played it so much that the fire button on our paddles broke, and we had to wire in like a commercial uh, uh, heavy duty button and was taped onto it, whatever, to be able to play Space Invaders. Because a lot of people, when they bought VisiCalc, to do business, but they really like to play Space Invaders.
sure. Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Apple Invader. If you're talking about Apple Invaders, that's a really good
Now, this was Space
version.
Invaders, the one that was available back in probably early '79.
Yeah. Um,
I don't know who it came from.
so the main reason you chose the Apple, though, to start with was because the disk drive had
Well,
been
yes and
developed.
no. The reason was, first of all, we worked this deal out with this publisher. We didn't own any personal computers, but they had some. They were able to lend us an Apple II. One of the people who ran that company liked Apple very much, eventually moved out of the Boston area, moved to Silicon Valley, ended up with some of the same um, investors and stuff like that that Apple had. They like and had a little bit of Apple stock even. I think they loved Apple. And the feeling that they had was that initially Apple would have floppy drives more than the others would have. As I was told, Apple had locked up a lot of the available production quantity of Sugar Associates 5-inch floppy drives. And so it was more likely you could get a floppy disk drive for an Apple II. We did run on a cassette. Our product would run on a cassette version. It was challenging, but we made sure you could run on cassette. And but the others caught up fast enough. But that, yeah, we put it on that because they said, why not do it with the Apple first? We thought it would be really quick before we'd be on something else. It turned out there were other reasons it took a while before we were able to be on the others. It wasn't just a month or two, it ended up being a year or so. With the
Okay.
And as Steve
So,
Jobs says, that made a big difference. If we had put it on another computer, you'd be talking to somebody else right now, he says. In a great
hmm.
interview he did for WGBH TV here in Boston many,
Well, I
many.
mean, there weren't a lot of choices, as you mentioned in '77. I mean, all you had was the big three that
Yeah,
you
well,
mentioned.
79, 78 when we made the decision. Yeah, to
Yeah,
start. It was, yeah, there were the three you could really buy. You could go into a Radio Shack store and buy Radio Shack. Commodore, I don't remember how you got it, but it was available. And there were Apple, and there were computer stores around you could buy it from.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
my friend Bob Frankston, who wrote most of the code of VisiCalc, he had worked for a company called ECD. And ECD also made a 6502 based personal computer. They were a competitor of Apple. Sophisticated business. Their price was $654.32 or something, 65432. I mean, but Bob had done programming for them initially. And he worked for them, I guess, or whatever. And they had development tools on Multics that we were able to rent and use to do 6502 development. Though I ended up writing some tools for a Prime mini computer that Bob and I bought, to do our development. Bob wrote an assembler and a linker. So we did our development on our own software development tools for most of early VisiCalc development before it shipped. So,
So most of your development was done not on the Apple II. It was
oh,
done
none of
on,
it was done on the Apple II other than the
yeah.
prototyping. Um,
Okay.
I mean, because what development tools? I mean, I wrote the prototype was written in floating point basic, I think. I don't know, it was integer, probably floating point basic. And but Bob wrote it in 6502 assembly language, and there was no assembler, good assembler that would let you write a program that was, tens of K in size, I mean, no. So we used one of the best computers you could get at the time, the MIT Multic system. It was the same system that was being used for development of the Ada language. We rented time on it. Bob worked late at night when it was cheaper. The only other users at that time late at night were maybe a few students and the Ada development team, which was in France, I think. So they were on a different time zone. So we used heavy duty mainframes for development. Microsoft later on, I can show you. I have a video of Bill Gates talking to John Sachs, the guy who wrote 123, and he's telling him how they use Xenix, which is a later version of Unix, which Unix came from Multics, that was running on DEC computers, probably DEC 10 computers or something, or VAXs, I don't know, whatever, that they had bought. And that's how Microsoft did their development. They used larger computers to do development. It wasn't until sort of like the IBM PC, it really wasn't that practical to do heavy duty development on, especially, yeah, even when there's even without hard disk, whatever, to do development on your personal computer of any heavy duty program with lots of stuff in it and all that. People
Do you
did,
recall what the,
yeah, but yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, do you recall what the initial response was? I mean, was it an immediate hit or did it take a while
Well, it
for
depends
it
on what you mean
to,
by that. When it first came out, we showed it. We showed it privately at an industry conference that cost a lot of money. One of those expensive to go to ones, run by Morgan Stanley, by Ben Rosen, guy who ended up funding and heading, being chairman of Compaq years later. Ben, at his electronics conference, it was shown privately. Um, and we also showed it at the West Coast Computer Fair privately. And then it was announced publicly at the National Computer Conference in June of 1979. It was shipped in October of 79. And the New York Times had an article on page B1 of the New York Times, which was about the humorous, a layman's trip to the mega land of computers. It was a humorous article, and it made fun of everything. And it said, even as the believers gather, the painters are adding to the Pantheon in the sign room or something, right? Writing VisiCalc, all hail VisiCalc, ha 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 ha. So we had New York Times, all hail VisiCalc. That was the last time, pretty much, that electronic spreadsheets were, this is an important type of thing, mentioned in the popular business press for a couple of years. But we did hand out reference cards, which told you how it worked, and we demonstrated it at this conference. And there were people who got the idea that this would be useful. Most people would not understand electronic spreadsheet until you actually see it in operation. And even if they saw it in operation, they didn't get it unless it was a problem they understood. But some people could generalize and looked at it. Those people went and bought it. So it sold, it was one of the best selling pieces of software on the Apple II. Doesn't say very much, but eventually we could figure out how many Apple IIs were being sold through various computer stores by how many copies of VisiCalc they sold, because about every other one, about half of them were going out with VisiCalc, and the others pirated it. So it got bigger and bigger and bigger, slowly but surely. But there was no, it was no putting it on, you know, putting it up on YouTube or something like that. You're not going to see any of those type of thing. Like today, there was no Twitter, no, whatever. And the PC publications were just coming. It was written up in Byte magazine. Our publisher, he had been one of the founder editors, and his friend was the editor of Byte magazine. And we had a nice article in there. But the article was right before we came out. And the article said, here's an example using transcendental functions, sine and cosine. We go, well, we haven't programmed sine and cosine yet. We had promised it, but we haven't had it. So I had to get a book over there that I went through and figured out how to be able to program the sine and cosine. I wrote the sine and cosine program. I learned about that book from the same person who had worked one summer at Microsoft and helped them for BASIC get theirs, I think. So it wasn't like today where one TikTok video and you go from 0 to millions of copies in a day. It took a while, but anybody who bought it became the hero of their company. And because they could do in a few minutes what normally took hours or days. And so that's there were a few computer stores that got it. What we did is we made the demo floppy that was sent to each of the computer stores. They got a free floppy. One side had VisiCalc on it, and you flipped it over. It was one-sided disk, so we get two-sided, whatever. The other side had a self-running version of it where it had keyboard macros coming in and making it, telling you what's doing, and they would put it in the window showing something happen. Some computer stores, like here in Boston and Burlington, the computer store at Burlington, they figured out, oh, you can really sell computers just by using this, by showing them this VisiCalc program. They sold more apples than anywhere else in the country. Down in Connecticut, Southern Connecticut, near all these companies that are headquartered down in Stamford and places like that. Simerin's computer company, he learned how to demo it without demoing and basically asking people what they wanted and sold it to all these corporations that then bought lots and lots of copies. And he sold lots. So the sales, the computer stores that understood how you sell it to a business person, because nobody but a business person would want it in those days. Um, they did well, and the sales got better and better and better. And we put it on more and more different personal computers. IBM came to us and said, "Hey, we want to put it on the secret new computer we're coming out with." Came the IBM
Hmm.
PC. We got a piece of wood with some circuit boards on it, which we kept in a locked room behind another locked room, and we converted it to run on the IBM PC. And it came out the day the IBM PC came out. It had VisiCalc on it.
Great. I was going to ask you about that, how the IBM PC version came about.
They came to us and
So
asked for it, and we said, "Sure." Now it took
yeah,
work. It was work to do it because it was an 8088 and we hadn't converted it to the 8088. But
sure.
we modified our assembler to automatically do a lot of the conversion. That was done by my cousin David, and then the actual finishing of it was done by the guy by the name of Jeff Stevenson, who went on to work at a Sierra Online later, and now I think maybe at Microsoft working on Outlook or something. And he converted it. He was a Zen swordsman, black belt swordsman, and we told IBM, "Don't worry, nobody's going to come near your computer. You know, they'll protect you." And but we got it working on the IBM PC. They told us it was like one of the least buggy things they had gotten of the early stuff. And I had that video. I don't know if you saw the video on I have up on YouTube of the day the IBM PC was announced. I happened to record a home video of the staff meeting we had, reading all the material from IBM that they had sent us about this new computer and showing and whatever. And it turned out that was the only video about stuff like that of the day, and ended up in Triumph of the Nerds, that PBS special that TV program they did. But that's
Hmm.
available on if you go to youtube.com/danbcast, DANB, like Dan Bricklin, cast, CAST. If you go to there, you'll see that video of the IBM PC being announced.
Great. So do you recall when you started getting competition from other
Yeah. Yeah. The first,
spreadsheets like 123, right?
no, no,
Lotus
no. The
123.
first 123 is like the 50th or something. The
Oh,
first one of interest, I think, that actually happened was SuperCalc.
super cow.
When Adam Osborne wanted he wanted a spreadsheet to bundle with his Osborne One luggable computer,
Hmm.
and we weren't able to make a good deal with him. At least our publisher couldn't make a right deal with him. So he convinced this company that needed a name. So they took the word micros and spelled it backwards and called it Sourcem. And they developed this product called SuperCalc. And I have a picture of them showing it off on the Osborne at National Computer Conference or something. They were still working on it. They didn't have all the right features. I asked them why don't they have certain features, and they said, "I don't know." And then of course they had those features afterwards, and they became competition. But there were a variety of others that made them until then Microsoft came in with Multiplan, but Multiplan was designed to be on as many different computers at once. It was done I think, in a bytecode type of thing, and had a limit of 64K or whatever, and it was kind of clunky. And so then the person who was the product manager at Personal Software of VisiCalc left for various reasons, was sort of had to leave there, and formed a company later named Lotus Development Corporation that developed a spreadsheet called 123. And this is a person who knew spreadsheets better than almost anybody else. The development was done by John Sachs, who had developed a spreadsheet for a mainframe product called 2020, I think. He may have worked on that. This is, we had known John before. I knew John before he worked on that and before I did VisiCalc. They did this product called 123, which was a killer product, incredible product. And it came out when the IBM PC, after the IBM PC came out, tailored to the IBM PC, machine code for it, gorgeous code, well implemented. Mitch Kapor, who ran that company, founded that company, got Ben Rosen, this guy who ran the conferences, became a venture capitalist. He was his funder. He got the editor in chief from McGraw-Hill of the top PC magazines to be, to do documentation and other stuff like that and production, and hired away from Microsoft a person to help them get it out, who was in charge of multiplan and all that type of stuff. And they came out with this product called 123, just as the IBM PC was getting popular. And that is, if you look at Inside the Tornado, there's a book about that, about the adoption curve. The tornadoes, when the adoption curve just goes right up, it's going along, early adopters, and then 123 was right there at the time to take it, and they couldn't sell enough. They couldn't make enough copies. They sold $60 million the first year, which is an incredible amount for those days. Went public, and we're off to the races. They could read VisiCalc disks. You could take a VisiCalc disk, stick it into 123 and read it, and it would run, and then convert it over and it would run later on. So that was, let's say, the 10th, 50th spreadsheet. Later spreadsheets, eventually there was this thing called Excel. Excel could read 123 files and convert them well enough, not perfect, but well enough, so that people could actually go from VisiCalc to 123 to Excel. And we still have Excel today for many good reasons, and not so good reasons, but we got Excel.
So I don't know that a lot of people know, because software arts is so well known for VisiCalc, that you guys had other software as well. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, let's see, we did TK Solver, that I think may still be being sold, which was a back solving product. Means you put in formulas and you could say, well, this has a value of this has a value of this, and with units and whatever, and it would look at the formulas symbolically and give you answers and stuff. So it was good for engineering and scientific products. We sold that off to Lotus at some point, along with VisiCalc, when we were sort of going under. And it's now somewhere, and I think not too many years ago, it was still being sold, may still being sold. We did a product called Spotlight, which was a thing you could, on an IBM PC, it's kind of like Sidekick, sort of killed us off, whatever, but you could, push a button, the TSR, and up would come, name, address book, and the calendar and stuff like that. We did a product that lets you connect to MCI mail to be able to pop up a mail product on the IBM PC and be able to send and receive mail. All these things ended up at Lotus. Lotus didn't do very much with most of them, but they could have dominated mail earlier. They ended up buying a mail product. That's some of the products that we did. But VisiCalc's the best known and the most successful of them.
Sure.
But it was only around for a few years, So, I mean, it was around for like 6 years.
So talk about the acquisition by Lotus. I mean, what was the impetus for
Oh, we
selling?
were running out. We with Lotus doing really well, we realized we needed to sell the company. And we found somebody who wanted to buy us, but our publisher sued us a few days before we closed, or else we would have been a division of CompuServe. And so we didn't get any money from that. Because when you're sued, you can't do a acquisition very easily. It's a mess. So we were not doing very well. We eventually settled with our publisher they tried to do something that was like an early version of Windows, and they didn't want to pay us for spreadsheets. So it's a whole complicated mess, and they ended up going under too. But so we were not making much money. And we came out with a variety of products like some of the ones I mentioned, the pop-up one and stuff. And but we were losing money. And I ran into Mitch Kapor of Lotus, who, knew, go on the way to a software conference, SoftCon, which was, I guess, in Atlanta then or somewhere. I don't know. And he said, "How you doing?" I said, "Lousy." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah. Want to talk about it?" We got on the plane. He was flying first class because this is before he bought his own jets. And I went up. I was in the back, but there was a seat next to him. So I went up and sat with him, and turned out they were interested in our TK Solver product. And that was a Monday. And by Friday, they had bought the major assets of our company and gave us enough money. So we paid off enough of the bank. We never went bankrupt. Our publisher at the same time had a layoff around the same time we did. And, whatever we ended up being able to, you know, uh, give Lotus the rights to it, but they never used it, VisiCalc. And Bob went to work for Lotus. I did not. I did some consulting for them and then moved to Software Garden, which was on the other side of Newton, and now moved over here, where I developed Dan Bricklin's demo program that runs on the IBM PC. I wrote that, and then demo 2 for it. Wrote demo 2 here in this room, and that
And that's a fascinating piece of software. So apparently that was it allowed you to create demonstrations of programs before they
oh
were
yeah,
written. So it was a way
it was a great
prototyping.
program. It was, in fact, it became it was the I have an award up there of best programming tool of 1985 or 6 or something like that
Mhm.
for demo 1 and then for demo 2, which was voted by the Software Publishers Association. I beat out Borland and Microsoft because what it let you do is it let you, in the character-based world, draw what was on the screen really easy using the keyboard with, and using the line drawing characters of the IBM PC and all, and mock up a screen, and then have multiple screens that you could, as you hit each key, you could switch screens and you could simulate a running program. And it was used
Sure.
for everything from fighter pilot screens to UPS driver stuff, whatever, and probably a lot of the screens of software that you may see when you check into a hotel room were probably designed using Dan Bricklin's demo program. And because it could really it simulate when you press the key. And I don't know if anybody has copies of it. It does not run on today's PC because it's when last time I did a demo
DOS.
of it, I had to get an old PC, and luckily sort of Skype worked on it. I don't know. But that it was very popular. It was not copy protected, so it was very popular all over the place, even if not everybody bought it. But it paid for me moving into this house. And eventually I sold that off to Peter Norton. And when it was still Norton, before Norton sold off to Symantec. So so I made a little bit of money off of that. That I used that to be able to develop more software over the years, and did a few startups after that for other on a variety of other early pen computing and stuff. I did software, early web software, software for developing websites. And then I have a software on the iPad. When it first came out, within a few weeks, I had my Note Taker HD product on it. I had written Note Taker, lets you write with your finger on an iPhone, and then on the iPad you could do that. It's still being sold, so I became a pretty good, in those days, iOS developer. And then I went to work for Alpha Software Corporation. Alpha has been around for many years. On the IBM PC, they did Alpha 4, Alpha 3, Alpha 4, Alpha 5, and now they have Alpha Anywhere that does web type applications and applications that run on mobile devices, and I work on mobile device software for that to this day, mainly in JavaScript. Still programming.
which is incredible. It's amazing
And
you're still
I
kicking.
like doing it and it pays some money.
Sure. So you also came out with a book, Bricklin on Technology. You want to tell us
Hmm.
about that?
Yeah, I think I got approached by John Wiley and Sons about doing a book, and I had been blogging since 1999. So we decided basically I would take some of my blog posts, or I wrote essays. I wrote essays and blog posts, and I took that and curated some of them, and then wrote some extra prose to go with it. Did some early podcasting. I was podcasting in the early 2000s, and I had some interesting interviews, like with Ward Cunningham, who invented the wiki, and with uh, uh, an vice admiral of the Navy who learning about how the Navy used computers and stuff like that. It was really some fascinating stuff. So I did podcasting, and so I took that stuff, some transcripts of the podcast and whatever, and I did this book called Bricklin on Technology. It came out in print because I was very careful about how to use footnotes for links and whatever, and it didn't lend itself to early Kindle. And then by the time I wanted to move it to the Kindle or whatever, Wiley decided they wouldn't want to do that. But it is available in PDF form that you can buy today. And if enough people buy it, I get a few pennies of royalties. It's got some interesting interviews and some interesting stuff. It was about early blogging, stuff about early blogging. There's some pretty cool stuff going on. So but it's it was my view of the world and stuff. I learned some things like, um, people often is when they're children, they fantasize about doing something and actually do it when they're old. So when Helen Greiner was a child, uh, this she saw R2-D2 in the first Star Wars and stuff, and was heartbroken. But she found out it wasn't real. Well, then she ended up being at the Artificial Intelligence Lab, I think, over at MIT, and then co-founded iRobot, which actually built real robots that actually went out in Iraq and places and actually diffused real bombs, and actually made the Roomba that she actually, I think, did the hardware for the Roomba or something like that, or the software or whatever,
Vacuum.
that actually cleans real rooms. So it's just kind of interesting how you know, the ideas as a child, we actually make them happen as we get older.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes that's good and sometimes it's bad, depending on what books you read.
That's true. So you appeared in a couple of documentaries. You mentioned Train for the Nerds, and there also was one called Aardvark, 12 Weeks with Geek.
Yep.
You talked about VisiCalc, I believe, in both of those. Was that
Yeah.
all fun?
VisiCalc was actually shown in a movie once. A movie, I think it was John Travolta, Night
Hmm.
Shift. It was about somebody working in a morgue who at night ran a brothel or something like that and did the
Yeah, but
business.
that wasn't John Travolta.
No, who was it? Who was it? It was, I have a copy of it
Uh,
somewhere.
oh, I
Who
forget the
was it?
guy's name. The guy that played Fonzie
Yeah.
was,
Oh, not Travolta. Yeah. Oh, shoot. Yeah. You can look it up.
yeah, I'll look it up.
Yeah.
I just can't think of his name at the
Yeah. It
moment, but
was,
I know who it is.
yeah. So he did that. He was in that, I don't know if I ever saw the movie, but I have a copy of the video, cassette. And starting to be in some others. We're hoping there's a movie about, an Excel championship, coming out about, students that do that. That's
Hmm.
going to come out, hopefully next year. And, I appear in there a little bit. So I
Oh,
do
nice.
interviews periodically, and you know, sometimes they end up interesting places.
Yeah.
And
So,
there's a TED.com video where I talk about the development of VisiCalc, which is why I didn't give you the full story, more of it, because it's
sure.
available there, 12 minutes on
Absolutely.
TED.com. Look up Bricklin.
Yep. I do have a couple of final questions here for
Okay.
you, though. So, even today, spreadsheets are ubiquitous and necessary piece of software that everyone uses and knows how to use. How do you feel about the work you did on VisiCalc and the impact that you had on how computers are used?
People are still coming to interview me here. I get film crews
Yeah, that's true.
come to my old school where there's a plaque in the room where I was saying that this dumb old student Bricklin was here and he did something great. Maybe you can do the same thing. Um, you know, yeah, am I happy? It's that's that the fact that you can go from a VisiCalc disk to a 123 disk to an Excel disk, and from Excel you can read it into sheets. That's unbelievable that they teach things that I came up with the idea that people know what A1, B1, and some of this, with ranges and
Right.
all these are ideas that I specified. I wrote the first versions of those and then was involved and helped design the software that first came out with it and helped teach the people how to do it, wrote the reference card. That's like, it's just wonderful. Man, as a somebody in their 20s, I did something great and I didn't have to worry whether I'd amount to anything. And,
Yeah,
and it
you
was
got to
something
live
really
what,
special. There's no way I could do any better than that. So, in terms of software development. So that took a lot of pressure off.
yeah, you got to live the dream that,
But I
all
did
of
it
us hope to
early
make.
before you were making $1 gazillion. So I could do an awful lot less now and
Well,
make an awful lot
there is
less
that.
more.
There is that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. So the other question I had is, you've done so many other things beyond VisiCalc. You've had a really long, distinguished career and still doing things, as you talked about. But you're best known by most people as the co-developer of VisiCalc. How do you
Mhm.
feel about that?
Um, Better than not being remembered. Um, I mean, some people come up to me and say, "You're the person who did demo," because it was called Dan Bricklin's demo, because I was
Hmm.
advised by Stuart. Also, name it with your name on it. That'll help it sell. And they said, have you ever done anything else besides demo?" So to a programmer, to many programmers, demo was the one that they knew me for. And some people today may know me because of, many doctors may know me because when they were in medical school, they used my Note Taker HD to take their notes in medical school. But most people know from VisiCalc, and there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, maybe a billion people who use spreadsheets every year, and that's pretty cool. You want to, as a child of the '60s, you'd like to change the world, and it's a change. I helped change the world. I changed the way business is done. All the things they taught us in business school you're supposed to do, people can now do because they have it. So I'm happy about that. Um, it opened up all sorts of gates to me, literally. I mean, Bill Gates, got to know some, and I've met Steve. I've had dinner with Steve Jobs alone in a
Oh, really?
hotel room.
Well,
Yes,
that's
not
amazing.
necessarily. Well, it's for strange reasons, but whatever. But he wasn't necessarily that happy about it, but we did. I've driven Bill in my car. He's driven me in his. We don't communicate much, but I've shaken hands with people who became president or were president and stuff like that. Because you get all sorts of little perks with that, and
Right.
so that's cool. So I got all this extra stuff. I got to go to all sorts of great conferences and things like that I wouldn't have otherwise. I got to there are these weird things that you wonder what it's like. Okay. So I got this award from PC Magazine. Okay. And Bob and I were getting this award. So they try to make, these formal look type stuff. So I brought my tuxedo. I have this tuxedo, and I brought this tuxedo, and I'm dressed up in a tuxedo. And we shared with Bill Gates, and who was also getting some award, limo going to and I got to be in my tux, and I get to walk through the casinos in Las Vegas in a tux, just like James Bond. And guess what? Everybody else is wearing Bermuda shorts and flip flops, and you feel
Right.
I felt so out of place. And it was like, what a bring me down. Here you're living, one of the people I talked to said, you get to drive in a limo. Yeah, limo is a big car, and who cares? I like driving cars. my best time in a limo is when the limo driver let me drive it because it was this new, really cool Cadillac that he had. And I said, "Hey, can I drive it?" And he said, "Well, there's nobody else around. You can drive it for a while." And because I like to drive, I like driving, and it was supposed to be pretty sporty. So that's, I got to experience a lot of experiences. Now, it turns out that just because you're talking to thousands of people versus talking to maybe, dozens in a room, they're both fun and interesting. And, I mean, it's not like the extra is that much better, and from what I've seen. And but I've gotten to experience it, and I'm very happy that I got this really interesting life. I got to have billionaires come to me and thank me for making them billionaires
Hmm,
because they were in the PC business.
right. Was there anything you want to say to the Floppy Days listeners? They're all
I don't
vintage
know what
computer
to tell me
fans.
who they are, why,
They're
what they
they're
like.
they're they're all vintage computer fans. They all, uh, you know, most of them have computers from the late 70s and 80s in their home. They collect them.
I have
And
I have a Data General 1 right over there.
oh, do
Uh,
you?
yeah, I have an old Mac SE that's
Uh-huh.
back there, both of which I have a grandson who is into vintage stuff. And he has asked for that stuff. And he has
Hmm.
actually played on those. The last person who played on the Mac, I think, was his mother when she was around his age. And he's also typed on my grandfather's typewriter that I learned from the 30s that I learned to type on. But he's into vintage stuff. He got into vintage video consoles, and when he was like 7, he was into that, or 6 or 7. And he has like everything, and he has like tube television sets. The big old these they were able to get these old big to plug them into, and switcher to switch them.
The
So
old the old tube
so
TVs, you mean?
tube, like an old Sony,
Yeah.
the thing that weighs a ton,
Right.
that's
Right.
whatever, and some smaller ones, whatever. He likes vintage stuff. He's into vintage trains at this point and stuff. But it was really funny to have him trying out the old Mac, and he said, basically the user interface seems similar to what we're using today. And this was, the
Yeah.
late 80s,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I understand this when we were young, people were into old mechanical stuff like cars. In the 60s, the old Chevys or the older cars, or old. We had a neighbor who used to have an old Lotus, some old Lotuses, cars, and he owned a Bugatti, which I got to see. When you have to start up like this, but it was a race car from way back when. So being into vintage stuff is cool. There's nothing like going to the Computer History Museum, and going through there and seeing all that stuff and touching it, and to see how clever people have always been and appreciate what they did. And it's, and then using that as to see what can you do with the constraints of this piece of hardware. What could you do with it that we hadn't thought of today? Apple ended up, putting a mouse and a drawing program on the Apple II after they had done it on the Lisa and then the Macintosh, I think, because now we know what you need. And so that's pretty cool to be able to repurpose old stuff. People, and as a developer of old stuff, it's nice that people care about that. One thing I should say is we should thank David Reed. David Reed, he would work for us at Software Arts at one point, but he was a close friend of mine, and he actually is responsible or partially for the slash between TCP and IP. He actually helped invent the internet, so to speak. But when he worked for us, he kept a copy that was uncopy protected of the IBM PC VisiCalc. And that's the one that I made available on my website with the help of permissions from people at IBM who ended up with the Lotus intellectual property rights. And that's why you can run today on the emulators or on real IBM PCs. If you can get that on a floppy, you can run that on an IBM PC today and see what VisiCalc was like. And you can get a copy of the reference card from my website from bricklin.com and actually use it as it was and see that it had things that, not all spreadsheets had afterwards. It had multiple windows and you had synchronized scrolling where when you moved one window, the other window would move in sync, in the direction that was not parallel with. And it had locked panes and stuff like that, which you needed on a 40-column Apple II. You wanted to take advantage, you had to be able to look at a big spreadsheet and you want to look at the sum or the final number or whatever intermediate at the same time that you're typing in somewhere else. And so you needed to, and we made that work on a product that ran in 32K bytes, including the operating system and the screen buffer. And that was a no mean feat. Why didn't VisiCalc have a help system? We wanted one. Do we have any memory for it? No way. People wanted memory for their spreadsheet. It had to be memory.
I think I have the Atari 800 version on disk, and I've got I've got the TRS-80 version on disk, but I don't know if I have the Apple version on disk.
Oh, well, you have to try to get it online. It's hard, see if anybody on eBay wants to sell it. And it's I have one, and I have an Apple II somewhere in a warehouse, so that hopefully my grandchildren and maybe great grandchildren can actually try it at some point and see what's what.
Good deal. Well, that's all the questions that I had for you, Dan. Thank you so much for your time. I will let you know when this gets published, and it's been great talking with you.
Thank you for keeping old computers around and stuff like that. And it's means we worked real hard back then, and people maybe will appreciate some of the stuff we did.
Right.
It's we don't want to forget.
That's the goal.
Yeah. So take care. I'll stop.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.